Hi everyone, my name is Adrian. I'm the CEO of REMAX of Southern Africa. This COVID-19 pandemic has had an unbelievably negative impact on the world as a whole, not just from a health perspective, but the economy as well. And South Africa certainly is not immune to that effect. What we wanted to do today was to bring you some practical advice and tips that you can use to assist you in dealing with the situation currently under lockdown and then coming out of it, particularly from an SME perspective. So we sought the help of an expert that's going to share with you today. His name is Douglas Kruger. He's written over 8 books, which include titles such as They're Your Rules, Break Them, and Is Your Thinking Keeping You Poor? Well, today, Douglas is going to talk about his new book, Virus Proof Your Small Business, 50 Ways to Survive the COVID-19 Virus. Guys, I want to introduce to you Douglas Kruger.
Adrian, thank you so much for that kind introduction. Much appreciated. Folks, good day to you. My name is Douglas Kruger. And the question I think that we're all facing right now is, how is your business doing? Are you still up and running? Are your doors still open? People have been sharing memes on Facebook where they show the planet exploding in the background and an astronaut saying, OMG, the economy, as though the economy were not important. But the economy is not a distant, abstract, or removed system. The economy is us. It's our businesses. It's how we fund our families, how we feed our children, how we keep ourselves safe, and how we maintain a civilization. So while we do have to take necessary precautions, we cannot simply turn our backs on an economy. And certainly, if you are a small business owner, this is a frightening time. Let's talk about what you can do about it. So, a few weeks ago, I received an email from Penguin. I'm up to 8 business books with Penguin, and we have a close working relationship. And their email had a simple question. Are you in the market to write a book about how to survive the COVID crisis if you are a small business owner? And the catch for this one was they said, if you are, you have 2 weeks to get it done. And I tried not to think about it too much. I simply took a deep breath, said a quick prayer, wrote yes, and got stuck in. And Penguin have since said that this is actually something of a record. We got the book done between 2 Wednesdays. 7 days to write a book. They reckon it's a new record, and certainly it's a record in terms of how quickly they then edited it, put it together afterwards. And the second mountain I had to climb was recording the audio version of the book. Here's what helped though. People from all around the world simply hurled ideas at me. Professionals, professors, people who had simply observed a good principle and seen how it worked and kept a business going. They threw ideas at me, and my task was to turn it into chapters, turn it into illustrations, and turn it into something that can hopefully help businesses around the world. Now we have a unique and interesting development here. Initially, this was written for the South African business market, but it was written in such a way that the book could be universal in its principles. So Penguin then approached their headquarters overseas, based in London, and they said, would you like this book? And after a very quick review, they wrote back and said, yes, we want to publish it globally. So this book is now available all around the world as an ebook in places that are in lockdown and in print where they're able to do it. And of course, the audio version comes out within the next couple of days and will be available globally as well. So this is the first time ever a Douglas Kruger business book will be available in Romania, Croatia, New Zealand, India, literally all over the world. And it's a wonderful thing, and I'm deeply honored. My hope is that it keeps families afloat and helps businesses to survive. So today I would like to share the best and most useful concepts from that book with you. And my earnest wish is that this keeps you going. Business is not a zero-sum game. It is not the case that each person in competition takes from the other and hopes that they can survive. The way economies actually work is that if everybody prospers, then everybody prospers. So we have a unique scenario here in which we have the opposite of the old Cold War dynamic. Remember the phrase mutually assured destruction? Well, we have the opportunity to create mutually assured survival. If you do well, your colleague does well, your competitors do well, and everyone around the world continues to do business, then we all make it. So let's ask, how do we make that happen? The opening of the book says, if you're feeling flustered, if you're feeling emotional, if you don't know where to begin, keep your eye on this simple formula. Business survival equals profitability over costs. That's it. Now we can add complexity to both sides of that equation, but that's the whole thing. Profitability over costs. So, in the simplest terms, you want to keep your costs as low as possible and your profitability as high as possible. Some people are only focusing on one side of that equation. It's understandable that they would only focus on saving costs. The potential downside to that is that you might save and conserve your way into the grave. That's no good either. We need both sides of that equation. So, profitability on one side, keeping your costs as low as possible on the other. It is always the business formula. We need it now more than ever. So everything we're about to discuss goes to that formula. It's our guidance, it's our orientation, it's the thing to hang on to when you're feeling flustered. Now today what I'd like to do is to take the 50 chapters of the book, 50 different ways, the creative ideas, and broadly divide them up into 5 themes. Our themes are your mind, your staff, how you do business, doing business online, because that's become a big one now, and finally we'll look at rules and creative rule breaking. Can you break rules in strategic ways in order to gain an advantage right now? And can you do so safely and legally? So let's start with the first one, which is mind. The entire world is under duress right now. People are facing a great deal of strain, and if you are watching this, it is probably because you're a business owner who's struggling or worried or fearful or nervous. You're facing some serious and unprecedented challenges. How do you deal with your mind? Well, the first choice that I would like you to make is the choice to fight for your business. This is your baby. This is your creation. You are its custodian, and it does not survive without you. Now, here's a thought. This is not relative to the importance or the gravitas of your business. Even if you make party balloons, even if you do something that is seemingly trivial, your business is a small building block that is a part of our civilization. It is a part of the foundations upon which we are able to live the way that we live. What you do and the degree to which you can keep your business going is the degree to which our civilization prospers and survives. We need you, and I would like you to choose to fight for your business. Cognitive psychologist Steven Pinker takes it one step further. He says, business is the greatest peace-creating force humanity has ever seen. More than any other force, the idea that we have to learn to cooperate with one another and trade with one another and mutually create and share value is the thing that keeps human beings safe, peaceful, and prosperous. What you do matters, and I'd like you to choose to fight for it. Now, the next decision after you've done that is to try to turn this into a galvanizing mission. Hardships and difficult periods in time test us. Now, of course, we tend to think of this as a deeply and fundamentally negative thing. It doesn't always have to be. There have been many studies done on what makes human beings happy. And it's interesting to note that a certain degree of wealth does increase your happiness, but only up to a limited point. Beyond that, adding more and more wealth to it doesn't actually bear on happiness. And the studies also find that some of our most challenging and some of our most difficult times, we also tend to look back on as being the best periods of our life. Now that's quite interesting. Here we are facing a massive challenge. So, are you going to turn it into a sort of doom and gloom narrative? And are you going to keep your thoughts and your fears to yourself and distance yourself from your family, from your staff? Or are you going to choose to do the exact opposite? Are you going to, with a glint in your eye, turn this into a shared mission? You would be amazed how galvanizing that can be, even to the degree of including your children in a challenge. There are interesting examples of this one where, for example, if you go onto YouTube and you look up minimalist lifestyle, there are whole channels dedicated to that idea. And what's fascinating is when they get the children involved in the sense of mission, in the sense of conserving, saving, and asking, what can you do to contribute to the family's mission? The children become energized by the mission. And that's what we're after. So we want to lead people on a mission rather than be speaking about this period of gloom and woe is me. This is a, come on guys, we can do this. Let's share and pool our collective intelligence and energy. Now, the next thing that I'd like you to do, because you are the business owner, you are going to go through periods of deep blue funk, depression, self-doubt. I would like you to pre-program your mind with a rescue mechanism. Now, this is not very complex at all. It's as simple as deciding what you will do when you feel stuck. Now, that can be anything. That can be, I'm going to get up and go make a cup of coffee. It could be, I will get up and go take a walk around the lawn. I will do a workout session. I will take a shower. Anything. It doesn't matter what it is. But you need to make that decision in advance and preload that into your brain. Then when you're feeling stuck, you don't agonize about it. You just recognize that you're feeling stuck. That's the trigger. And you resort to your key escape clause, your escape valve. So pre-program your mind with a thing you will do when that happens. Be amazed how much that helps. Right, the next thing. We're starting to get practical now. You need orienting documents. So what I would like you to make a habit of doing right throughout this crisis is just writing things down. The reason for that is that our thinking can be quite emotional at the moment, and with all the sort of the drama and the trauma, you can lose good ideas as you go. So any good ideas you have, I want you to write them down. I don't mind how you do this. You can keep a notepad with you, use the notes section on your phone, whatever it works for you. But you're going to start with 2 orienting documents. The first has to do with your numbers, and the second has to do with your dependencies. Your numbers, your dependencies. We start with the numbers. All right. So numbers are wonderfully logical things. They take you out of the world of emotion and they give you something solid to dig into. I would like you to know your numbers. And by that I mean everything. What's up? What's down? Which revenue streams have dried up entirely? Which revenue streams are perhaps still showing a bit of profitability? What are the numbers telling you? Are they telling you that there are massive and disproportionate costs that are not helping right now and that need to be culled? Are they telling you that there are opportunities in other places? What are your numbers telling you? Are they showing that certain things are heading for disaster in a hurry and must be addressed? If so, put that onto a list of things that must be addressed quickly. So start off by aggregating your numbers and letting them simply tell you the tale of where your business is right now. That's the numbers document. The second one is the dependencies. On whom does your business depend to do what it does? Who or what do you rely on, both upstream and down? Okay? Who are your dependencies? Now the chances are, here we're mostly going to be talking about supply chains. What state are your supply chains in right now? I'm going to give you an interesting exercise to do. I would like you to do 2 things that seem mutually contradictory. The first is this. If your suppliers are faithfully supplying you, I do not want you to change suppliers, and I want you to faithfully pay them. Keeping businesses going is almost it's a game of perceptions. If we all play the game faithfully, it continues to survive. So if they are faithfully supplying you, please faithfully pay them. And the same thing down the chain. If people are faithfully buying your products and you are able to, please keep faithfully supplying. Now, I said there was going to be a contradictory idea here. I also want you to research alternative suppliers. However, I don't want you to make the switch. And the reason for that is that ethical maintenance of business keeps everyone going. It works in everyone's favor and it helps everyone. However, there is a realistic chance that your suppliers may go under. So you have to be ready for that. Don't make the switch, but be ready in case you have to. Here I would like you to run a scenario and ask yourself, what do we need to do or prepare in case we need to make that switch? Do we need to, for example, research who might supply us? Do we need to prepare anything on our side in case we have to make the switch quickly? Don't make the switch, but be ready to do so. All right, so orienting documents. I'd like you to get into the habit all through this crisis of simply writing things down. Here's another orienting document. This is number 3. We're going to call it the Vulcan List. The Vulcans from Star Trek were known for being coldly logical and unemotional. Folks, the reality is you are going to have to do a number of hard things during this period. You may, for example, and this is a worst case scenario, we'll look at ways of avoiding this. You may have to lay off staff. You may have to go and talk to the taxman. You may have to ask suppliers or creditors for extensions and periods of grace. There are difficult things you're going to have to do. Draw up a Vulcan list. Now, the Vulcan list is a list of things that are hard that you necessarily have to move through and execute and get rid of like a Vulcan. You do not have the excess energy, the excess mental capacity to have things hanging over your head during this crisis. Draw up your Vulcan list and make a point of getting those things done quickly, coldly, efficiently, and get them out of the way. That way you can use your creative energy to move on to the next thing. Talking about that creative energy, I would argue that the news at the moment is 10% your friend and 90% your enemy. It's not helping. There are small amounts of things that you need to know for basic survival, to know what's going on in the nation, and then afterwards, for heaven's sake, switch off the news. You do not need it pouring poison into your mind 24/7. From all of the news channels all around the world, they are premised on awfulness. The degree to which they can make you feel bad is the degree to which they succeed at their mission. Turn it off. Social media is arguably worse. If you have to use your phone, try and read a book on it instead, or listen to an audiobook. Audiobooks are exceptionally good right now because you can get any information you need and you can speed them up if you want to. I tend to listen to business books on Audible at 1.5 times speed. And it's amazing how much information you can take in on the fly while you're jogging, while you're in the bath, while you're working out, particularly uninteresting lovemaking sessions, whatever. You can simply and massively increase the amount of knowledge that you take in. The next thing to do in terms of your mind and mental health, which is our first theme, our first topic, is consider the idea of creating schedules throughout the day. We're feeling a little lost and adrift right now. I don't know about you, but I lose track of which day it is during the week, and it can be a little depressing. It's amazing how productivity drops under those circumstances. If you're struggling with that, do this. Draw up another list and you go, here's how my day looks. And it might be the first hour, get up, shower, get dressed, put on makeup. Do all of those things that make you feel that this is the beginning of a day. There is in fact psychology to back the idea that how we dress impacts how we feel about ourselves. The term is embodied cognition. And what that basically means is you feel and you think through the lens, the framework of how you look. Your self-image does make a difference. So consider creating a schedule in which you divide your day up into time zones and then you faithfully stick to the things you need to do at each point in time. Then in the evenings, reclaim your life. Your workday is done. Just because you are not coming home from an office doesn't mean you shouldn't consciously switch off and go and have some fun. Next and final tip in terms of managing your mind through this crisis is that simple changes in location make a very big difference. There is much to be said for working in 90-minute chunks. There is in fact a great deal of research that says the most productive way to work is to close a door and focus on one thing for a 90-minute chunk. I know, for example, if you're writing a book and have to do so in 1 week flat, that doing so in 90-minute focused chunks is by far your most productive option. What you then want to do is change locations. So if you are working in a home office, go and sit outside for 10 minutes. Maybe you can even work outside for your next 90-minute chunk. Sounds silly, but if you're stuck in a house, simply moving around the house and changing your visual location makes a difference. And outside and sunshine impacts quite greatly on your mind. Right, that's theme number 1, which is your mind and how to manage it. Now let's move on to theme number 2. And I think to the great credit of South African business owners and entrepreneurs, and in fact business owners and entrepreneurs all around the world, this one has been front of mind. Staff. What on earth do we do to keep people gainfully employed? Let's start with a philosophical idea that has a very practical end result, which is this: little is better than nothing. Thomas Sowell, who is a multiple award-winning historian and economist, a gentleman from the United States, Dr. Thomas Sowell, He has one of the most beautiful brains I've ever encountered. He is just incredibly good at unpacking how human dynamics work. And over the course of several books, he has a passionate go at the idea of a minimum wage. Now that may sound like a surprising thing to say, because every time we encounter the idea of a minimum wage, we are told it's a kindly thing, it's a compassionate thing. Thomas Sowell tracks the reality of it through human history and says it's one of the worst things you can do to poor people. The very simple explanation goes like this. Imagine that your wealth potential exists on a curve from zero, which is absolute poverty, all the way up to immense prosperity. What people assume is that if you increase the minimum wage, it takes the poorest of the poor and pushes them up a notch. It's not what happens in reality. What it actually does is it creates a gap between zero and where that person can get to, and that gap becomes insurmountable. Simple practical example of this one. Somebody asks you for piecework and you pay them $50 to sweep a factory floor for a day. Now, that may not sound like a large amount of money. However, for a person in absolute poverty, that is an improvement in their scenario. You bring in a minimum wage that says, well, you have to pay them $500 a day to sweep your factory floor. And what happens? The reality of the thing is people say, well, it's not worth $500 a day, so no. And that person goes from a potential $50 a day to zero. Now, he gives some very moving examples of how this has gone wrong around the world. He picks on what we typically call the sweatshops in Southeast Asia and groups like Nike. And he says, we talk about these sweatshops as being unkind, cruel forms of slavery. He says, here's what we don't know. What we don't know is that those sweatshops pay more than any other employment option in that nation. And he says, when kindly-minded progressives step in and shut them down, what happens is those people go back to prostitution. So the reality of the thing is little money is better than nothing. Folks, if you can't pay a full salary, please try to pay your people something. Okay, it makes a difference. So, get a little choked up on that one. So the basic idea here is we want to find ways in which we can keep people going. Now, how do you practically pay a little rather than nothing? Let's say, for example, you have a staff of 100 people. What if, rather than laying off 50 of them, half of your staff, instead of doing that, you allowed 50 of them to work for 2 weeks, and then you cycled them so that the other 50 worked for the next 2 weeks, and then you paid them a smaller amount of money. Little is better than nothing. So that's one example of what you might do. You might cycle staff. You might also repurpose them. So for example, if they have a core skill, if they are knowledge workers who know how to do something, could they do something else instead? And if you take that approach, there are a couple of ways you could go. The first is you could simply permit them to work freelance. If you have a photographer, could they do something that they sell to someone else around the world? If you have an architect, a games designer, somebody who knows how to program, could they simply be free to use their skills and find employment via international platforms? There are good examples of that one, like Upwork or Fiverr, and Fiverr is spelt with 2 R's at the end. And those are forums where they can list their services and people from around the world can use those services and pay them online. That's one way, simply to free them up to do that. The other way is to hire them out. Now, this becomes a fundamental change in what you do. Instead of selling the thing you used to sell, what you're doing is going back a level and saying, what skills do we have and how else could they be used? And that's a whole different way of thinking about it. Now, you could also open up the possibility for your staff to receive tips, and that can be in the real world or it can be online. Take the example of Fiverr. If you order, say, an animation from Fiverr, there will be a standardized cost which you are required to pay in US dollars, and it's usually a fairly low fee. Then you have the option of adding a digital tip if you like the work. Now, right now, around the world, people are consciously and to their credit looking for ways to support entrepreneurs, to support small businesses. If you make it possible for people to do that, they may choose to do so, to support people. So look into virtual tip jars. Next thing you can do with your staff, if you have the luxury of time and you do actually have some capital resources available, use this time for upskilling. You can, for example, encourage your staff on the cheapest end of the scale, to simply watch YouTube videos about relevant skills, how to design graphics, how to sell more effectively, leadership skills, public speaking tips. On that one, Forbes lists public speaking as the #1 skill that you can master if you want to advance in your career and become wealthier. So that's one that is well worth studying. They can use their time for upskilling. There are also examples of online university courses, and I give the link to this one in the book, where you can actually go and have a look at all of the free online varsity courses from around the world. I myself have a couple of extra offerings on this one. I run a daily YouTube channel in which I share one tip per day under the theme From Amateur to Expert. And it's tips about work, wealth, leadership, how to position yourself as a top name in your industry, and I share one per day. There are some 400 of them already available, and you can go and watch them via douglaskruger.com or simply by going onto YouTube and typing in either Douglas Kruger or From Amateur to Expert. Now there again, that's free. You can simply spend your time doing it. If you'd like a paid option, there is a group called Future Self Academy, futureselfacademy.com, and they offer author-led courses. I'm one of their authors. So for example, you might pick a book like Is Your Thinking Keeping You Poor? Or Own Your Industry, How to Position Yourself as an Expert, which are both my books. And what you would do is you would pay, I think it's around 450 Rand per course. With that, you get the book in digital form, but you also get little video segments in which I guide you through the book and little quizzes. Complete the book, you get a certificate of completion. You could encourage your staff to collect those certificates and upskill themselves right now. Pick a business book and the author will lead you through it. The next thing you can do is, and this is probably something that most people are facing, is negotiate new realities. So you can't go to work at the moment, and it might be a while before we can. And even when we can, everything is going to look different for a while at least. Here are a couple of things to consider. Zoom meetings. Do people know how to host a decent Zoom meeting? Your first starting point. Please teach them not to place the camera down so that they're looking up their nose, or up so that you can see their carpet. You need it more or less flat on, and if you go slightly higher, it hides the sort of double chin thing, and it gives you slightly better quality. There are tips you can share about lighting and so on and so forth, but probably the most important thing to consider is to ask the question, do you need your meetings? Quite arguably, the #1 destroyer, annihilator of productivity is meetings. So you have to start by asking, do we need these meetings at all? Or could my staff simply get on with things? If you are doing meetings for the sake of creating a nice tableau, the feeling that we are all going together, you might be making a mistake there. You have to ask yourself whether meetings are necessary and find ways to keep them to a minimum. Encourage your staff to use WhatsApp, to pick up the phone, to send emails as much as humanly possible. Now, if you do decide that meetings are important to your particular scenario, here's something that I'd like you to learn from. The Israeli Defense Force, they are studied by agile organizations around the world, and they have something that enables them to create what they call total situational awareness. Now, this is important if you have what you might call a fighting team going through a difficult period. If that's you, here's how you do it. At the end of every day, regardless of what happened on the field of battle, regardless of the outcome, regardless of fatigue, the IDF gather their people from lowest level to highest level, and they hash out what happened that day. They cover 3 things: what worked, what didn't, how we'll do better tomorrow. And that's it. What worked, what didn't, how we will do better tomorrow. The rules are no hierarchy. Everyone gets to argue and to make their point. And the purpose of this uncomfortable, almost chaotic seeming debate, is that it promotes this awareness everywhere. The people on the ground floor, the people in the leadership teams get to see and to hear all the issues, and they can compensate where necessary. Another rule, no blame games. You need to know what's going wrong, which departments are not pulling their weight, what things are not getting done. That's the point of total situational awareness. You do not have the time or the luxury of blame. You need to know what's going wrong so that someone can pick up and compensate for it. So those are some ideas around staff. And again, the guiding principle there, please, if you can, pay them rather than not paying them, even if it's a reduced amount. Now, let's get into what is probably the most important section of all, which is how to do business. How do you reconfigure, repackage, restructure what you do in order to keep your profitability higher than your costs? And there are creative ways to do this. Your first decision is to ask yourself what not to do right now. This is not business as usual. You are not in any way morally obliged to do all the things that you used to do. So ask yourself, what doesn't fit right now? What's too expensive? What can we and should we cull? What processes are too burdensome right now? And here I'd like to encourage you to try out a concept from one of my books. It's a book on innovation called They're Your Rules, Break Them. And the basic concept is the lazier you're thinking, the more innovative you are. Take the example of PayPal. PayPal is essentially a banking solution, but it wasn't invented by a bank. Why? Because banks think with the baggage of 100 years of banking. They think through their own complex rules, their own complex systems and so forth, and they don't come up with simple, lazy ways of doing things. PayPal looked at all of that and said, well, I couldn't be bothered. Why can't we just? Now that's the exercise to do with your staff, or if you're a solo practitioner, while walking around your garden. To say, what's the point? What's the outcome? What's the core value, the thing we need to get done? Can't we just? Don't think in terms of how you traditionally used to do that, the steps, the systems, the processes, the rules. Think in terms of what's the laziest, quickest way of getting that over and done with. That is innovation, and it works like an absolute charm. So decide what not to do. Now, you're probably struggling with cash flow at the moment. I think cash flow is arguably the big problem that kills small businesses. A thought on this one, and this is a bit of a depressing thought, but you need to know it. Some surveys estimate that up to 1/3 of small businesses fail because of theft. That's a frightening statistic, 1/3. And it's not something we're often told that, 33.3% of businesses that fail because someone stole from them. Now here we're not talking about casual pilfering. Here we are talking about the person who has access to your books and to your accounts. It happens so often that it shows us that people don't believe it will happen to them. Yeah? And of course, the thing is, when you are dealing with someone who is conning you, they are by definition the nicest people you have ever met. They look so honest. They tell such a good tale. So, unfortunate but true, as a business owner, you must have access to your books and to your accounts. You must know your numbers. The temptation to siphon off of a business right now is higher than usual. All right. So what can you do about positive cash flow? Well, how about offering vouchers? If you cannot do what you do right now, is there a way in which you can offer vouchers in lieu of future service? So perhaps you might set up that future event. You might sell dinner tables, meals. You might sell future issue of your product simply by making it possible to do so, and perhaps offering an incentive to do so. It might be, for example, discounts, it might be order in bulk, and whatever the case might be, it might be gain extra points through our point system. Incentivize your customers and sell now in lieu of the future. Use a vouchers system. We've got, for example, a gentleman in our area who drives a small truck around the neighborhoods, and the truck stops outside of houses and he does pet pampering. He does all of the clipping and trimming and bathing and so on. He's not allowed to do it at the moment, but he can, for example, sell vouchers to do so in a month or two from now. That is a clever option. It keeps the cash flowing. You could also think about structuring your business for future success. So I'll share a few more ideas with you about how you could actually sell positively and keep money coming in. But if that is absolutely impossible for you right now, could you do other things? Could you, for example, consider buying up your competition? Could you consolidate them? Have you asked? They might want to exit the game right now. If you offer, they might say yes. Could you position yourself as an expert for the future? I'm a big proponent of this expert positioning, and it works for brands as well as for individuals. It is particularly powerful for the individual. It asks the question, how can you become the Branson of business, the Clarkson of cars, the Schwarzenegger of bodybuilding, the Oprah of TV, the Nigella Lawson of food? And if you study these individuals, which is something that I do, I study expert positioning, you find that there are core positioning principles that they all use. For example, they might have a famous television show. Could you propose a television show? They have written books. Could you write a book? They have won awards within their industry. Could you start training or preparing to win an industry accolade? What could you do now that positions you as a thought leader, an icon, an expert, someone to be emulated, a go-to person in the future? If you cannot sell right now, can you position yourself for future sales? Could you do something else entirely? Pixar quite famously used this principle. When they started out, they thought they sold computer parts. There they were in Silicon Valley, and they made computer bits and pieces, and they sold them to people around them. And they also dabbled with a little animation on the side. Every now and again when someone would ask, they'd make an animated logo. And eventually it dawned on them that that was where the real gold lay. That they were not a computer parts company, they were an animation company. And the thought process for this one is to say, imagine that you inherited a farm, and this farm is stone, it's rock, it's unyielding, it's unfertile. What if you're actually a quarry? The resources were there in great abundance all along. You simply had to think about who you are and what you do in a different way. So, what infrastructure do you possess that could be repurposed and used differently? What core skills do you have that could be used in a different way? What insights would lend themselves to a completely different industry? And again, this pertains to the staff, as we spoke about earlier. What do they know? What can they do that can be used in a completely different manner? Now, here's another radical idea for rethinking how you structure your business. And this one is quite mind-blowing in how clever it is, and yet at the same time, it doesn't sound revolutionary at all. Could you serve your customers? Now, here's where it becomes a radical idea. Forget what you do. Forget what you've always done. If you can't do that right now, sweep it aside. Now, look at your customers and perhaps their customers downstream and ask, what do they need now? Forget what we used to do. Forget how we used to supply them. What do they need in the broadest terms? Can we do that instead? Now, if you can answer that question, you might do a 180 pivot, remain profitable, and do something completely different, but for the same people. And there's something wonderful about that. It positions you as an agile, clever, service-providing thought leader in their world. You are still their go-to source, just for what they need right now. So the way to look at this is to say, what do our customers need? What do their customers need? What's the big problem they're facing right now? Can we solve that instead? If you used to make horse feed and you can't sell that right now, and what they actually need is barns, could you build barns instead? That's how radical that question becomes. The next one, of course, is the core skills and abilities that you have, or the infrastructure you have. Could you barter with those things for what you need? So here you would start by saying, what do we need? What are we short of? All right. What do we have that we can trade for that? Whether it's in kind, in work, in effort, in advertising, in publicity, what could we trade for what we need? You could approach people who have that. They might say no. They might say yes. You never know. Or simply ask them, what do you need right now? And find creative ways to be that service provider. All right, so that's number 3. And there are more ideas in the book. In fact, there are a lot more ideas in the book. But that gives you a broad overview of the thinking, which says take your business apart, reconfigure it, find what people need, deliver that instead. Now, probably one of the most useful ways to do that, simplest, easiest, most cost-effective, and the one that really is going to be working right now, is to go online. If you haven't been an online business before, congratulations, you are one now. The decision has been forced upon you. Everything was going digital in a hurry prior to this. It's now an absolute necessity. So let's start by exploring the degree to which this can be a wealth principle. Here's how it works. It's as simple as this. If you can make it once and sell it many times over, you will become wealthy. That is how Rockefeller became wealthy. That is how the founder of Spanx, the first female billionaire, became wealthy. And that is how the person who Forbes lists as the 3rd highest posthumous earning celebrity which is a fancy way of saying third wealthiest celebrity dead guy, how he got that right. And he was a gentleman by the name of Charles M. Schulz. Now, if you go and check the Forbes lists of posthumous celebrity earners, it's always number 1 and 2 are always Michael Jackson and Elvis, and they kind of interchange and swap places. Number 3 is Charles Schulz. He is the author of Peanuts, the comic strip. Let me run you through his working day. It was strenuous. He woke up, had a cup of coffee and a donut and checked his mail. Then he sat down for an hour and drew a 3-panel comic strip. Right, we're done. That's it. Now, why was that a wealth principle? Well, because he made it once and he sold it thousands of times over. He drew that 3-panel comic strip and then sold it to 10,000 newspapers around the world. Each one gave him a small amount of money. He did that every day. Then at the end of the year, they took all of those comic strips, bound them into a book, and published them in 100,000 bookstores around the world. Keep that up for 50 years, you end up wealthier than 2 late members of the Beatles. So that is a mega wealth principle. And basically, it pertains to digitalization or syndication. Make it once, sell it many times over. You can do that with books. You can do that with songs. You can do it with courses, seminars, art, tours, well, online digital tours. There are all manner of things that you can do once and then sell multiple times over. And in some cases, you would think that it doesn't pertain to your industry, yet it might. What if you're a gym? Gyms are facing an awful time right now. I mean, the whole basic premise is you come to us, use our machines, and then go home again. And yet that's not the core value. The core value is the exercise itself. You can still sell that online. I was checking out some videos by bodybuilders and fitness coaches and so on, and they've been doing an obvious thing: how to get a good workout at home. Now, folks, some of those videos have achieved 20 million views. And I can tell you, because my YouTube channel is monetized, that if you get 20 million views on your site, that is an annual income for that one video alone. And of course, it hints at the idea that you've got to give excellent value. You've got to know your stuff. You've got to make it entertaining. You need to make it come alive. And you need to learn the basics of video, lighting, and so on and so forth. All of those things are learnable online. You simply search for each of the topics. But it shows how even things that we believe are location dependent can be turned into digital essence of. Could you do that in your world? Now, your starting point, if you're new to online, is to please go and check your website. Is it up and running? It's amazing how many websites are not up and running. The owners are not aware of it. Is your website up? Is it running? I had a problem just the past couple of days with my website. In fact, right now it's down and my service provider is fighting it to get it back up. However, I will say this in my defense: I noticed within 1 hour and we are working on it. So is yours up and is it running? Now, the next test, go one step further. All right, it's up and it looks pretty. Does it work? So place an order. Send an order via the order form and check if it actually gets to you. A weird reality in South Africa is that prior to the crisis, the number of businesses that did not respond to form requests was remarkable. Now, that was a strange and unacceptable thing at the time. It's utterly unforgivable now. So make sure the website is working and that it gets through to you. Go and do a quick audit for what we might call tone-deaf advertising. For instance, does your email banner head say something like, "The 5 top destinations to visit right now," or "Book your tour to Wuhan," or something like that? Is there tone-deaf advertising that you haven't noticed? Now, if you are, for example, a travel agency and you're doing that on purpose, where you're selling future tours, then by all means, but make sure the advertising clearly states that. Right, the next thing. Try not to do boring updates. Let me ask you a question. How many emails have you received with a headline like COVID-19 update? Do you read any of them? Are people over-communicating in the attempt to become thought leaders? You can and should do it, but you have to do it in fascinating ways. Get to the value quickly. So, for example, you might say things like 3 ways to keep your muscles stimulated during lockdown, and then you go straight to the value or provide a video. People will go for that. But when you're doing long, waffling philosophical updates, people will simply delete. We are also heading very quickly toward Zoom webinar fatigue. So can you do something else? Maybe it's just a meme that stands out. Maybe it's a great video, something entertaining, fresh, fascinating, something that's not the same as everybody else. If you're going to do webinars, why is your webinar different? What makes it stand out? What makes it fresh, powerful, fast, impactful? Right. Now, if you are looking at online sales and you've never done this before, there is research to corroborate the idea that the swiftness and the ease with which someone can place an order and have the order delivered measurably increases purchase. Let me run that one by you again. If it is easy, quick, and convenient to buy from you, people buy more. You can increase your profitability simply by making sure that that is quick and convenient. If you're having this done or designed for the first time, or if you're perhaps designing it yourself, the temptation is to say, well, I don't care what it looks like as long as it works. Well, the people who buy from you care what it looks like. It is exactly the same as walking into a beautifully lit premium luxury store and the sense of expectations you have with that versus a sort of bang it together mom and pop vendor with naked light bulbs hanging from the ceiling. It creates expectations, it communicates tone, and the better, faster, and more enjoyable the experience, the greater the profitability, measurably. The final thing is safety and hygiene concerns. If, for example, you are going online and you're able to do delivery. Now, some places are in lockdown right now. Some places, of course, are able to do delivery. Right now, in my scenario, we're not, but hopefully in the next couple of weeks we can. What you want to do is advertise the fact that you do safe and hygienic. So if people have to, for example, come to you to collect it, could you do a drive-through collections window? That's quite a clever idea because even during sort of semi-lockdown, people can go through a window, order a thing and receive it, provided you're allowed to sell it. Next thing that you could do is if you are doing deliveries, you could advertise and state the fact that you do safe hygienic delivery. Your staff arrive with gloves, they place a package on a counter and they back away. Your customer collects it and there is no signing entailed, no physical exchange and so forth, and you tell the world that. And that is in fact a selling point right now. So what have we looked at? We've looked at an orienting idea, which is profitability over cost. That's what you keep your mind on. Then we looked at how to manage your mind using documents and using rescue mechanisms and keeping away from social media. We've looked at staff and creative ways of keeping them going with the underlying principle that little is better than nothing. We've looked at how you can do business differently. And again here, if you're interested in more of this, it's available both in the book, which is Virus-Proof Your Small Business, and it's also available as daily videos on my YouTube channel, From Amateur to Expert. The basic idea is you break it down into its parts and say, what can we sell? What could we sell later? What could we position? What could we look at and repurpose in different ways? And the fourth one was online. If you're not online, you have to get online, check that the website is working. The degree to which you make it easy and professional is the degree to which you increase your profitability. Can you deliver? Are there creative ways to do it? Final idea. Let's talk about creative rule breaking. One of my books with Penguin is called They're Your Rules, Break Them. 50 ways to smash silos, bust bureaucracy, and create a high-performance culture. And it looks at creative ways of tinkering with the rules, the norms, the systems, the way things have always been done, and finding strategic advantage. Now, here's how you can do it within your world. If you are the owner of the rules, in other words, someone is dependent on you for a yes or a no or permission, can you free them up and give them leeway? Could you, for example, put certain norms, processes, requirements, regulations, even meetings, needs for updates on hold, on pause, and give them that small amount of freedom? You know, we tend to think that this gives us a loss of control. In many cases, the opposite is the result. If people are working remotely, they cannot fake busyness. They can only give real, actual results. So if you're struggling with that sense of letting go, that is a reassuring idea. Working virtually means that people can only give results, they cannot fake busyness. Now, the opposite side of that coin goes like this. What rules, regulations, laws, systems, requirements are getting in your way right now? Can you appeal to that authority and have them dismissed or paused or at least ask them to give you a little leeway and a little relaxation. The reality of the matter is they may not have thought of it. A friend of mine related a story in which we were 1 week into lockdown and one of the regulatory bodies sprang into action and suddenly demanded compliance from a certain industry. And it was non-negotiable, and it was capricious, and it was unnecessary. It was simply a raw exercise of power for the sake of power. In certain places in the world, notably in the United States, they are looking at rules, laws, legislation, regulations that they can relax in order to make it easier to do business. Could you collectively and as an industry appeal to the lawmaker, appeal to the regulatory body and ask for leeway? That could be enough to keep your profitability high and your costs low, because every rule comes with an associated cost and an associated burden. You might not be able to afford the time or the finances or simply the allocation of resources to that right now. So folks, the reality is there are creative ideas everywhere. And the wonderful thing about entrepreneurs and business owners is that they are so willing to share them so openly. And I was deeply blessed by the number of people who contributed principles and ideas to Virus-Proof Your Business, the new global book with Penguin. Let's share the ideas that work. In fact, in parting, let me ask you to do two things. The first is document what works in your scenario, because inevitably there will be future crises. You want a record of what you tried, what worked, and what didn't. And the second part of that equation, please share those ideas with other entrepreneurs. Business is not a zero-sum game. The more everyone prospers, the more everyone prospers. If you try something and it works in your scenario, share it with someone else. There is no data available from the future. Everyone is coming up with their best ideas, their best strategies, their best guesses, and trying things. So if you try something that works, please share it with others. It might save a business, it might save a family. We are all part of building this economy that sustains our civilization. It makes peace possible, it makes food possible, it makes it possible to educate our children and enable them to go further than us. It matters that you stay open. I wish you every success, and I hope that your business prospers through this difficult time, and possibly even more so on the far side. If you use this time now wisely to position yourself for success, I wonder if you might not actually do better on the far side. I'm betting on you.